What's your relationship with your siblings like? Close, distant, complicated?
Imagine standing under those blinding stage lights in a packed auditorium, the air thick with anticipation as hundreds of eyes fixate on you, your family seated prominently in the front row with expressions that blend pride and unease, and then, in that electric moment, you deliver a line that shatters their carefully constructed illusions, a line that echoes the pain of years past while underscoring the sweet irony of your ascent. But to truly grasp how I arrived at that podium 5 years. After being branded an embarrassment and unceremoniously ejected from my childhood home, we must rewind to the unraveling that began during my junior year at the University of New Mexico, where the weight of mounting student loans, interminable lectures on topics that seemed utterly disconnected from any practical reality, and the relentless pressure to emulate my sister's seamless academic prowess had conspired to push me to a breaking point I never saw coming. At 20 years old, I was pursuing a business degree that felt more like a burdensome obligation than a passion. Spending countless hours hunched over my laptop not to absorb the intricacies of supply chain management, but to secretly tinker with lines of code for a whimsical app designed to track community events in our Albuquerque neighborhood. A diversion that provided fleeting sparks of joy amid the drudgery. Yet my parents, Rosa and Javier, who had immigrated from Mexico and toiled through 2 jobs apiece without a single vacation to scrape together the funds for our educations, viewed any deviation from the prescribed path as a personal betrayal of their sacrifices. My younger sister Maria, 2 years behind me in school and already excelling in her engineering program with the kind of effortless grace that drew admiring glances from professors and peers alike, embodied everything they hoped I would become. Her straight-A record and burgeoning internships serving as constant reminders of what I was failing to achieve. So when I finally gathered the family around our worn kitchen table during a tense holiday break, the stack of unpaid bills glaring accusingly from the center like silent witnesses to my unraveling resolve, and declared with a voice steadier than I felt that I was dropping out to confront the real world head-on and find a way to contribute immediately rather than accrue more debt in pursuit of a degree that no longer ignited any fire within me. The reaction was swift and devastating. Rosa's face draining of color before flushing with a fury I had rarely witnessed, her words slicing through the air like a sharpened blade as she labeled me an embarrassment to the family name. A squandered investment that threatened to tarnish the reputation we had carefully cultivated in our close-knit Hispanic community, where stories of upward mobility through education were the stuff of local legend. Javier, ever the stoic provider, could only shake his head in disbelief, his muttered condemnations about how my decision would forever cast a shadow over our household mingling with the clatter of dishes as he stormed off, leaving Maria to deliver the final blow with her polished sympathy, her perfect smile masking what I later suspected was a hint of smug satisfaction as she advised me to consider the example I was setting for younger relatives who looked up to us, and by the next morning, the verdict was final. My belongings hastily packed into garbage bags by hands that once nurtured me. The door closing behind me with a finality that echoed louder than any argument, stranding me on the curb with nothing but $20 in my pocket, a borrowed backpack, and the crushing realization that the very people who should have offered unconditional support had instead cast me out into an uncertain world without a safety net. Those initial weeks dissolved into a haze of desperation as I bounced between the couches of sympathetic friends, pounding the pavement for entry-level jobs at greasy diners and sprawling retail outlets where the fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly overhead like a mocking soundtrack to my diminished circumstances. Lying awake in the dim glow of street lamps filtering through thin curtains while their voices replayed in my mind like a relentless loop, questioning whether I was indeed lazy and undeserving or if there was some deeper truth to the path I had chosen. Yet amid the self-doubt, that clandestine coding project refused to fade, evolving in stolen moments into something more substantial, a tool that connected locals in ways the textbooks never could, and it was during one particularly grueling shift flipping burgers at a fast food joint, the sizzle of the grill drowning out the chatter of customers, that I overheard my cousin Luis on his phone. boasting loudly about Maria's latest academic accolade while dismissing me as the family's perennial screw-up with a laugh that twisted like a knife in my gut, igniting a slow-burning resolve. That propelled me to delve deeper into online resources, mastering programming languages through free videos and forums until my fingers ached from the keyboard. But the real jolt came unexpectedly while scrolling through job listings on a glitchy public library computer when I chanced upon a digitized family photo album that Mom had impulsively shared on a social platform. Its innocent metadata concealing a scanned letter from decades earlier revealing Dad's own abrupt departure from college. Under circumstances he had always glossed over with vague excuses, a hidden chapter of hypocrisy that made my pulse thunder as I absorbed the implications, wondering if this buried secret could serve as the key to reclaiming my narrative or if exposing it would only deepen the chasm between us. And as I powered down the machine with trembling hands, the weight of potential confrontation settled over me like an impending storm, leaving me to ponder in the quiet hours whether I possessed the courage to wield such knowledge or if it would consume me before I could turn the tide. Those revelations about Dad's hidden past lingered in my mind like an unwelcome guest during the long, exhausting days that followed my ejection from the family home, transforming every mundane task into a reminder of the fragile foundations upon which our lives had been built. As I navigated the precarious rhythm of low-wage survival in Albuquerque's underbelly, where the summer heat baked the asphalt and turned my commutes into sweaty ordeals, waking up on that sagging couch in my friend's cramped living room each morning with the faint scent of stale takeout clinging to the air and the distant hum of traffic serving as my alarm, before dragging myself to the coffee shop gig that paid just enough to cover shared rent and instant noodles, but left my spirit frayed at the edges from the endless parade of entitled customers who treated service workers like invisible fixtures in their hurried lives. 6 months into this grind, I had mastered the art of pasting on a smile while steaming milk for lattes that cost more than my hourly wage, cracking wry internal jokes about how my business degree dreams had devolved into expertise in espresso foam artistry and the subtle psychology of upselling pastries to hungover undergrads who stumbled in looking as disheveled as I felt on the inside. Yet beneath the forced levity, the sting of familial rejection pulsed steadily, manifesting in the sporadic voicemails from Mom that arrived like clockwork on Sundays, her voice laced with a mix of concern and condescension as she recounted Maria's latest triumphs, such as securing a prestigious internship at an engineering firm in downtown or presenting at a student conference, always circling back to the pointed question of when I plan to pull myself together and stop embodying what she euphemistically called our family's temporary setback. I attempted to rebuild in small ways, submitting applications to community colleges for evening classes in computer science that might validate my self-taught coding experiments or even exploring vocational programs in web development that promised quick certifications without the mountain of debt, but rejections piled up like unread emails, each one chipping away at the fragile optimism I clung to during those midnight sessions hunched over my second-hand laptop, fingers flying across the keys to refine that event tracking app into something functional and perhaps even marketable, a digital sanctuary where I could pour the creativity stifled by academia into lines of code that actually solved problems for everyday folks in our community rather than abstract theories detached from reality. Then came the unexpected call from Maria one humid evening as I wiped down the sticky counters after closing, her tone dripping with that practiced sweetness she reserved for delicate family matters, inviting me to our parents' upcoming anniversary barbecue as a chance to demonstrate that I wasn't entirely a lost cause in the eyes of the relatives who would undoubtedly be there to compare notes on our divergent paths, and despite the fresh bruise of her earlier complicity in my ousting, I accepted because some stubborn thread of loyalty or perhaps masochistic curiosity compelled me to face the firing squad. Arriving at the backyard gathering under strings of colorful lights, where the air was thick with the aroma of grilled carne asada and laughter from aunts and uncles toasting to Maria's unblemished future while sidelong glances assessed my faded jeans and the faint grease stain on my apron that I hadn't fully scrubbed out. Dad cornered me near the cooler during a lull in the festivities, his calloused hand gripping a cold beer as he delivered his gruff advice to secure a real job and abandon this phase of aimless wandering that he insisted was no longer endearing, but rather a drain on everyone's emotional reserves. His words landing like dull punches that echoed the hypocrisy I had uncovered in that forgotten letter. Yet it was Luis, my boisterous cousin with his perpetual grin and knack for embellishing tales, who pushed me over the edge when I overheard him schmoozing with an old family acquaintance who owned a bustling auto dealership, falsely claiming credit for a garage renovation project that Dad had actually leaned on me for ideas during my high school summers, a lie so blatant and self-serving that it ignited a spark of calculated mischief within me, prompting me to discreetly capture the exchange on my phone and later send an anonymous message to the acquaintance with a time-stamped photo from those long-ago days proving Luis's fabrication, ensuring that the confrontation unfolded just as the desserts were served when the man pulled Luis aside with a raised eyebrow and a pointed question about his so-called contributions. Watching my cousin's face flush crimson as he stammered excuses amid the clink of forks and oblivious chatter provided a fleeting rush of vindication, my first deliberate act of payback delivered with the precision of a well-aimed dart rather than a sledgehammer, a clever undercutting that restored a sliver of balance without descending into outright chaos or drawing suspicion back to me. However, the evening's fragile peace shattered during the quiet aftermath over plates of flan when Mom drew me into the kitchen for a private word, her eyes brimming with unshed tears as she expressed the depth of their worry that Maria's trajectory toward stability contrasted so sharply with my apparent drift, her voice cracking slightly as she glanced toward Dad, who busied himself with cleanup to avoid the conversation, and in that vulnerable moment, fragments of the truth began to coalesce. In my mind, connecting the dots to their early marital strains exacerbated by his undisclosed college abandonment, which had plunged them into financial quicksand and positioned us daughters as the vessels for their redemption narrative, with Maria having quietly absorbed and perpetuated those secrets to maintain the facade of familial perfection even at the cost of my exclusion. A betrayal that hit with the force of a sudden downpour, leaving me soaked in resentment as I excused myself early and drove away in my rattling old sedan, the taillights of their home fading in the rearview while questions swirled about whether I could ever bridge such a divide or if severing ties completely was the only path forward. Days blurred into a monotonous routine until an email notification pierced the fog one afternoon during a rare break at the coffee shop, originating from a local tech enthusiasts group I had lurked in online without much expectation, offering a freelance opportunity to develop a basic application for inventory management at a neighborhood bakery whose owner had stumbled upon my rudimentary portfolio shared in a forum post. And as I read the details outlining flexible hours and a decent payout that could finally afford me a step up from the couchsurfing existence, excitement warred with apprehension because accepting meant diving deeper into this uncharted territory of my hidden talent, potentially pulling me into orbits that intersected uncomfortably with my family's world of conventional expectations and unresolved grievances, leaving me to stare at the screen wondering if this was the break I desperately needed or merely the prelude to a more profound entanglement that would test every ounce of my resolve. Embracing that freelance coding opportunity for the neighborhood bakery marked the tentative beginning of a transformation that reshaped my existence from the ground up, pulling me out of the suffocating cycle of minimum wage drudgery and into the uncharted waters of self-directed learning, where every late-night tutorial on algorithms and user interfaces became a defiant act of reclamation against the naysayers, who had written me off as an irredeemable embarrassment as I meticulously crafted the online ordering system from scratch using nothing but free online resources and a laptop whose fan whirred like an overworked engine during those marathon sessions that stretched well into the dawn hours. Infusing the project with intuitive features tailored to the bakery's quirky needs, such as real-time inventory alerts for fresh-baked goods and customer loyalty tracking that anticipated orders based on past purchases, all while the owner, Carla, a sharp-eyed Latina entrepreneur in her 50s, who had built her business from a single pushcart, observed my progress with a mix of skepticism and growing admiration. eventually declaring with a hearty laugh that my lack of formal credentials mattered far less than the instinct I brought to the table, which she likened to a street-smart navigator charting courses through Tech's foggy terrain rather than a by-the-book captain doomed to run aground. This validation fueled a cautious optimism that prompted me to expand my horizons, enrolling in virtual workshops on app development and data structures that I squeezed between shifts at the coffee shop, which I hadn't yet quit because financial stability remained a precarious illusion in a city where rents climbed relentlessly and unexpected expenses like a car repair could derail months of scrimping. Yet as gigs trickled in through word-of-mouth referrals from Carla's network, I faced the first real crossroads when a recruiter from a corporate office downtown dangled an administrative position complete with benefits and a predictable 9-to-5 schedule that promised the kind of security my parents had always preached as the antidote to failure. A role that would have silenced their criticisms and allowed me to squirrel away savings without the volatility of freelance deadlines. But deep down I recognized it as a gilded cage reminiscent of the college path I had fled. One that would stifle the creative spark ignited by coding and relegate me to filing reports and scheduling meetings in a cubicle farm where innovation went to wither, so against what many would deem sound judgment, especially for someone in my vulnerable position, I turned it down with a polite email citing my commitment to a more entrepreneurial pursuit, a choice that left me second-guessing in the quiet moments as bills loomed and doubts whispered that perhaps I was repeating the same reckless patterns that led to my ousting. Making audiences like you who value the steady climb question whether my gamble on uncertainty was bold resilience or foolish stubbornness born of unresolved anger toward the family that had abandoned me when stability was within reach. The local tech scene beckoned next, drawing me to informal meetups in dimly lit cafes where aspiring developers swapped stories and code snippets over cooling brews. And it was there amid the clatter of keyboards and animated debates on emerging frameworks that I honed my portfolio, pitching small projects to skeptical attendees who often raised eyebrows at my absence of a degree but softened when demonstrations revealed the practical elegance of my work, such as a streamlined event app that had evolved from my personal hobby into a prototype capable of integrating community calendars with real-time notifications, eliciting chuckles from the group when I quipped that trading dusty textbooks for hands-on trial and error had turned out to be the upgrade my education sorely needed, masking the persistent knot of insecurity that twisted whenever comparisons arose to those with Ivy League pedigrees or even Maria's engineering accolades, which she occasionally flaunted in social media posts that filtered into my feeds like unwelcome reminders of parallel lives diverging sharply. Then fate delivered an ironic twist in the form of a substantial contract from a fledgling startup helmed by none other than Dr. Harlan, the very professor whose dismissive critique of my undergraduate group project as amateurish drivel had contributed to my mounting disillusionment with academia years earlier. His email arriving unsolicited with detailed specifications for an inventory management application that he envisioned as the cornerstone of his company's operations, and although a flicker of recognition might have ended the exchange prematurely, he addressed me simply as a promising freelancer sourced from an online directory, allowing me to accept under the radar with a surge of vengeful curiosity that propelled me to dissect his requirements line by line, uncovering glaring inefficiencies rooted in his outdated theoretical approaches, such as rigid database schemas that ignored scalable cloud integration and user interfaces burdened by unnecessary complexities that would frustrate end users from the outset. Rather than confront him directly, which might have invited scrutiny into my background, I proceeded with calculated subtlety, implementing the core functionalities as requested while embedding enhancements that addressed his oversights like adaptive algorithms for predictive stalking and seamless mobile compatibility, and in a move that danced on the edge of ethical ambiguity, I shared an anonymized beta version on a niche developer forum frequented by his competitors, framing it as an open source experiment to solicit feedback, but ensuring the trail led back to whispers about superior alternatives in the market, a clever nudge rather than outright sabotage that manifested weeks later when news circulated of his project's stumbling launch plagued by bugs and delays, while my refined contributions garnered quiet praise in industry chats. prompting a follow-up email from Harlan laced with confusion and a grudging compliment on the unexpected polish in the deliverables, to which I replied with professional detachment that understated the satisfaction of watching his pedestal wobble from the shadows, a payback that reaffirmed my growing prowess without burning bridges in a field where connections could prove invaluable yet complicated my ascent as Carla pulled me aside one afternoon amid the bakery's flour-dusted counter to caution against the perils of holding grudges in an interconnected industry where today's rival might become tomorrow's collaborator. Her words resonating as I weighed the thrill of retribution against the isolation it risked fostering in my still fragile professional network. Familial undercurrents persisted to intrude, with Maria reaching out sporadically through texts that blended overtures of sisterly concern with subtle updates on her impending graduation milestones, such as defending her thesis or networking at career fairs. Her messages carrying an undercurrent of strain as if she were navigating a script dictated by parental expectations, and during one of our infrequent phone conversations prompted by a shared holiday card, she inadvertently revealed details of Dad's recent health scare involving elevated blood pressure that he had downplayed to avoid, burdening us, stirring a reluctant tide of empathy that warred with my lingering resentments and tempted me to offer support from afar, though I ultimately held back, channeling the emotional turbulence into fueling my burgeoning consulting side hustle, which began attracting inquiries from nonprofits seeking affordable digital tools to amplify their community outreach efforts. Just as momentum built toward a sustainable rhythm, an email from a women's empowerment conference in Santa Fe landed in my inbox, extending an invitation to deliver a keynote on navigating non-traditional paths in tech, a prestigious platform with a modest honorarium that sent adrenaline coursing through me at the prospect of addressing an audience of peers who might see their own struggles reflected in my narrative. Yet the organizers' casual mention of a surprise alumni connection to the University of New Mexico introducing an element of dread because it hinted at entanglements with my academic ghosts, including potentially Harlan or even ripples reaching my family, compelling me to accept despite the gnawing uncertainty as I outlined my speech on scraps of paper during commutes, only for the plot to thicken further when an unexpected package arrived at my doorstep containing a cherished family heirloom, a delicate silver locket engraved with our initials that Mom had passed down through generations, accompanied by a terse note inquiring if she could finally claim some measure of pride in my progress, leaving me to cradle the cool metal in my palm while questions proliferated about whether this gesture signified genuine reconciliation or a manipulative ploy to draw me back into the fold just as my independence teetered on the brink of solidification. The weight of impending decisions pressing down like the approaching monsoon season that promised both renewal and disruption in equal measure. Delivering that keynote at the Women's Tech Conference in Santa Fe unfolded like a pivotal chapter in a story I was only beginning to author for myself, standing before an engaged audience of over 200 ambitious women who leaned forward in their seats as I wove the raw threads of my journey from familial exile and academic abandonment into a tapestry of unconventional triumph, eschewing scripted notes in favor of an authentic recounting that elicited ripples of laughter when I described how the label of embarrassment had paradoxically become the high-octane fuel propelling my late-night coding marathons and grassroots networking hustles, transforming what could have been a tale of defeat into an anthem of resilience that resonated deeply with those grappling with similar barriers in male-dominated fields. And by the time I concluded with a call to embrace the detours that academia often overlooks, the room erupted in applause that mingled with a flurry of business cards exchanged in the lobby afterward, each one representing potential clients eager for the practical tech solutions I had honed through sheer determination rather than diplomas, propelling Vasquez Tech Solutions from a nascent side hustle into a legitimate small business that necessitated renting a modest office space on the edge of Albuquerque's growing innovation district, where sunlight streamed through large windows onto desks cluttered with monitors and whiteboards scrawled with project timelines. With revenues steadily climbing from contracts with local nonprofits designing user-friendly apps for community resource mapping and small retailers implementing e-commerce platforms that boosted their online presence without breaking the bank, I took the leap of hiring my first part-time assistant, a recent high school grad with a knack for graphic design who brought fresh energy to client presentations, allowing me to focus on scaling operations while affording the small luxuries like a cozy two-bedroom house on the city's outskirts, complete with a home office overlooking a quiet arroyo. Yet for all the tangible markers of progress, such as the first paycheck that cleared my lingering debts and the satisfaction of seeing my name on a company letterhead, the ascent carried an undercurrent of bittersweet reflection because every milestone echoed the voids left by the family that had prematurely dismissed me, prompting internal debates on whether to extend an olive branch toward reconciliation or maintain the protective distance that had safeguarded my momentum, a dilemma that intensified as tentative overtures from home began filtering through like tentative rain before a storm. Starting with a neutral congratulatory card I sent to Maria upon hearing of her stellar thesis defense, which detailed her innovative work on sustainable engineering prototypes. Her response arriving promptly with invitations to casual family dinners that carried the weight of unspoken expectations for me to showcase my stability without dredging up past grievances. One such gathering unfolded over steaming plates of homemade tamales in the familiar kitchen where resentments had first boiled over years prior. The atmosphere thick with the sense of chili and masa as Dad opened up haltingly about his escalating health concerns involving irregular heart rhythms that doctors attributed to years of accumulated stress from juggling multiple jobs and unspoken regrets. His admission laced with a rare vulnerability that humanized the stern figure who had once packed my bags, while Mom nodded along with tears glistening in her eyes as she echoed his sentiment that they had pushed us daughters too relentlessly in pursuit of the American dream they had chased across borders, creating a momentary bridge of understanding that tempted me to lean in and share snippets of my professional wins, like the recent launch of a client app that streamlined donations for a local food bank. But the fragile harmony cracked when subtle cues revealed deeper fractures, such as Maria's evasive glances during discussions of university opportunities and an offhand comment from an aunt about how Maria had excelled in a competitive program, partly because spots opened up unexpectedly, planting seeds of suspicion that blossomed into confirmation during a private walk with Maria in the backyard under the canopy of string lights, where she confessed in a hushed tone that she had once whispered doubts about my reliability to a shared professor years back, not out of malice, but to secure her own standing in a cutthroat academic environment. A revelation that twisted like a thorn in my side because it blurred the lines between sibling rivalry and outright sabotage, forcing me to confront whether her golden path had been paved in part over the obstacles she helped place in mine. And in the midst of this emotional churn, an opportunity for measured revenge presented itself when I discovered, through casual inquiries at a community event, that Dad had been skirting tax regulations on the family shop's modest earnings by underreporting cash transactions in a bid to offset medical bills, a risky shortcut that mirrored his own buried history of cutting corners during his college dropout era. So rather than ignite a family conflagration with direct accusations, I opted for a sly intervention by mailing an anonymous packet to their home address disguised as a complimentary guide from a local business advisory service, filled with straightforward tips on compliant bookkeeping and IRS red flags that subtly highlighted the perils of his practices. Ensuring the materials arrived just as an innocuous audit notice from a routine check crossed his desk, which I had indirectly prompted through a tip line without implicating myself. And the fallout unfolded in a frantic phone call from Dad days later, where he probed with barely concealed panic if I had any involvement in the sudden influx of helpful resources that had steered him toward rectification just in time to avoid penalties, allowing me to feign innocent surprise over the line while a quiet chuckle escaped inwardly at the irony of him unwittingly receiving salvation wrapped in the guise of exposure. A witty form of payback that compelled accountability without shattering the tentative peace and left me grappling with the morality of such manipulations, even as it affirmed the clever edge I had sharpened in solitude. Professional entanglements further complicated the landscape when a major client, a mid-sized logistics firm, requested that I mentor aspiring developers at the University of New Mexico as part of their corporate outreach program. thrusting me back into the academic halls that had once symbolized my downfall and necessitating interactions with faculty, including the looming presence of Dr. Harlan, who now chaired a committee on innovation initiatives. And although apprehension knotted my stomach at the prospect of rubbing elbows with the man whose past dismissals had fueled my exodus, I agreed to the sessions, viewing them as a chance to subtly rewrite narratives by demonstrating real-world applications of code that outpaced theoretical lectures. A decision that unfolded tensely during the first workshop, where Harlan cornered me in the hallway post-presentation, his eyes narrowing in dawning recognition as he connected my surname to a long-forgotten underperformer from his classes, muttering something about small worlds and unexpected evolutions that carried a sour edge of begrudging acknowledgement, prompting me to respond with a composed smile and the understated retort that indeed the world felt remarkably interconnected when paths crossed under brighter lights, diffusing the moment without escalation, but stirring a whirlwind of emotions that questioned whether reclaiming these spaces was empowerment or a needless reopening of healed scars. As my firm solidified its reputation with back-to-back successful deployments that earned testimonials praising the intuitive designs born from lived experience rather than ivory tower ideals, the calendar inexorably advanced toward Maria's graduation milestone, a capstone event that loomed like a gravitational pull drawing unresolved threads together. And it was in this charged atmosphere that the formal invitation materialized via email from the university's Alumni Relations Office, extending a seat in the front row among distinguished guests for the ceremony while listing my name alongside other honorees, a gesture that sent my pulse racing with the dual temptations of silent observation to bask in their surprise or bolder intervention to command the narrative on my terms, compelling me to deliberate late into the nights over whether attending would affirm my transcendence or risk reigniting conflicts best left smoldering, especially as I leveraged recent conference buzz to pitch myself as a potential guest speaker to the event organizers, who responded affirmatively without probing the familial ties that added layers of intrigue, and just as preparations coalesced into a plan fraught with potential for cathartic revelation, another layer peeled back when I revisited Mom's old correspondence stashed in a drawer from the heirloom package, uncovering veiled allusions to Maria's private insecurities, including a stint of academic probation she had concealed to uphold the family facade, hinting that her advocacy against me might stem from projected fears rather than pure rivalry, leaving me to navigate the drive toward campus with a mind ablaze in ambiguity about whether these discoveries paved the way for genuine mending or merely illuminated the illusions that had sustained us all for so long, the horizon shimmering with the promise of confrontation that could either forge lasting bonds or fracture them irrevocably. Arriving on the University of New Mexico campus for Maria's graduation ceremony stirred a whirlwind of conflicting emotions that churned like the dust devils occasionally sweeping across the arid landscape of Albuquerque. The familiar red brick architecture and bustling pathways evoking ghosts of my own truncated time there, while underscoring the profound evolution that had carried me from couch-surfing dropout to a figure of quiet authority now listed among the event's distinguished speakers, prompting me to park my reliable sedan in the visitor lot with deliberate slowness, as if to savor the gravity of the moment before stepping out into the crisp spring air scented with blooming Palo Verde and the faint undercurrent of excitement from clusters of families milling about in their Sunday best, their conversations laced with prideful anecdotes that mirrored the aspirations my parents had once pinned so heavily on me and Maria alike. Spotting Maria in the pre-ceremony lobby amid a throng of cap-and-gown graduates exchanging hugs and last-minute well wishes, her eyes widened in genuine surprise when she caught sight of me weaving through the crowd with purposeful strides, her voice pitching up in disbelief as she asked if I was truly the Elena Vasquez slated to deliver the keynote address for the business and engineering cohort. A revelation that prompted a light embrace fraught with the unspoken history of our sibling tensions, yet softened by her murmured gratitude for showing up despite everything, allowing me to respond with a wry smile that masked the deeper calculations at play as I adjusted the lapels of my tailored blazer purchased from the proceeds of a recent client contract, feeling the cool weight of the silver locket from Mom tucked beneath my collar like a talisman bridging past and present. My parents materialized shortly thereafter, Rosa fussing over the precise alignment of Maria's tassel with maternal precision while Javier hung back with his characteristic reserve, his nod in my direction carrying a stiffness that belied the tentative warmth from our recent dinners, muttering a single word of pride that hung in the air like an olive branch extended across a chasm. And as we collectively filed into the auditorium under the guidance of ushers directing special guests to the front row, the irony was palpable with me positioned prominently among dignitaries while they settled nearby oblivious to the full scope of my involvement until the program unfolded with its procession of traditional speeches from deans and student representatives that dragged on with earnest platitudes about perseverance and innovation. The room's energy building palpably when Maria's name echoed through the speakers during the diploma presentations. Her graceful ascent to the stage met with thunderous applause from our section where Rosa dabbed at her eyes and Javier clapped with uncharacteristic vigor, a tableau of familial culmination that tugged at my heartstrings even as it highlighted the divergent journeys that had led us here, my own path forged in isolation contrasting sharply with the structured ascent she had navigated under their unwavering gaze, and in that suspended instant of shared triumph. A part of me genuinely celebrated her achievement while another observed the scene with the detached acuity of someone who had learned to question the veneers of perfection that families like ours so meticulously maintain. The transition to my keynote slot arrived with a subtle hush falling over the assembly as the MC introduced me not merely as a tech consultant, but as a trailblazer who had redefined success beyond conventional metrics, compelling me to mount the podium steps with steady resolve under the hot glare of spotlights that illuminated the sea of faces, including those of my family now fixed in varying degrees of anticipation and dawning realization. And Dr. Harlan seated on stage among the faculty. Panel adjusted his glasses with a furrowed brow before leaning toward the dean with a whispered query about whether the organizers knew the speaker's background, his expression shifting to one of intrigued skepticism as fragments of recognition flickered across his features. Setting the stage for the narrative I had meticulously prepared to unfold like a carefully scripted revelation. Launching into my address without the crutch of notes, I began by painting the raw strokes of my story, the abrupt college dropout amid crushing loans and disillusionment, with curricula that prioritize theory over tangible impact. The familial backlash that branded me an embarrassment and resulted in my ejection from the home built on immigrant dreams of educational salvation, and the gritty odyssey of self-taught coding that transformed rejection into a forge for innovation, eliciting pockets of knowing laughter from the audience when I quipped about how trading lecture halls for late-night debugging sessions had unwittingly equipped me with skills that outpaced many a credentialed peer, my gaze deliberately sweeping across Harlan and then lingering on my parents and Maria, whose postures had stiffened with the weight of exposed truths. Rosa's hand rising to cover her mouth in a gesture of belated remorse, while Maria's eyes darted with a mix of apology and discomfort that hinted at the insecurities unearthed in those old letters. Building toward the emotional core, I delved into themes of resilience against underestimation, recounting how doubters from professors to kin had inadvertently handed me the blueprint for a consulting firm now empowering dozens of underserved businesses with tools that bridged digital divides, and as the speech crested, I pivoted directly to address the interpersonal reckonings at hand, declaring with measured poise that those who had called me an embarrassment and cast me out after my departure from college could scarcely imagine the vantage point from which I now spoke, pausing for effect before turning squarely to Harlan and invoking the theme's climactic line in response to his earlier murmur when he had questioned if anyone truly knew the speaker's connections, stating unequivocally that I knew Maria better than he or any gatekeeper ever could, a delivery laced with witty understatement that sent a collective gasp rippling through the front rows and elicited a visible crumple in Harlan's composure as the full irony of my assent dawned on him, his past dismissals refracted through the lens of my present accomplishments that had quietly eclipsed his own stagnant lectures, rapping with an uplifting charge to the graduates to seize their narratives from the jaws of expectation and forge paths that honored their authentic strengths. The auditorium swelled with sustained ovation that carried me off stage, where congratulations flowed from attendees inspired by the authenticity of my testimony, yet the true undercurrents surfaced in the post-ceremony mingle as Harlan approached with a mumbled acknowledgement of my growth that bordered on conciliatory, allowing me to nod graciously without further engagement, while Maria pulled me aside for a hushed exchange where her voice cracked with admissions of past envy-fueled missteps that had shadowed my opportunities, her plea for understanding clashing with the unresolved edges of our bond that left me wondering if forgiveness could truly mend what ambition had rent asunder. Later, over an awkward celebratory dinner at a nearby restaurant where plates of enchiladas steamed amid strained small talk, Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand with a tearful apology for the blindness of their judgments rooted in fears of their own unfulfilled potentials, Dad adding gruffly that my path had illuminated blind spots in their rigid worldview, fostering a semblance of reconciliation that eased some fractures yet persisted in ambiguity as Maria's lingering silences and averted glances suggested deeper motives, perhaps tied to her concealed doubts or an enduring rivalry that success alone might not fully dissolve. And as I drove home under the starlit New Mexico sky with the echoes of the day reverberating, questions lingered like the faint aftertaste of spice, whether this reckoning represented true healing or merely a polished performance to sustain familial illusions, compelling you, the listener, to ponder if my triumphs had liberated us all or merely cast longer shadows over the ties that bind, the ultimate verdict resting in the uncharted territories of hearts, forever altered by the choices we make when pushed to the brink.